Hey guys, so you can think of spot rates as annual effective interest rates from time zero to time n. So we've talked about interest rates before in the time value of money video. You can essentially think of spot rates as interest rates, where if you have a given amount x at time zero, it accumulates to x times the interest rate or times the spot rate at the time period one, and so on. But the thing about spot rates is that this only starts from time zero to time n. So for example, if we have a spot rate when year of maturity, which is essentially the number of time periods. So year of maturity, if year of maturity is one, that means that we're only looking at one time period or 1 year. In that case, if your time period is based off of years. If it's two, then you're looking at 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and so on. So if the spot rate 1 year to maturity is 4 years, if that's 2.5%, then that means that every year your initial X amount that you had at zero is going to increase by 2.5% for 4 years. So that's the spot rate. We can see here in these diagrams that, for example, if it's four, if we're increasing by 2.5%, that's the constant amount that's going to increase by. And then if it's year three, and then it's 2.1%, that's the constant amount that it's going to increase by every year. Now, let's focus on some of these trends. So as the year to maturity increases, the price is going to decrease given a fixed par value. So first, before I mention this, you will really want to understand bonds and loans and really understand the time value of money first, in order to understand these spot and forward rate concepts. So first, as the year to maturity increases, the price decreases given a fixed par value. So if I have more years, right, if I have more years, then I will naturally start with a lower price because it's going to take me more years to actually accumulate to that same value, right? If I have X, if I at time zero, if I have X, right, to get to the same value um, of like 1,000, it's going to take me longer if I have a greater years to maturity period rate, or if I have more years to maturity. Okay, so now so spot rates, they're best basically interest rates. You can think of them as, and they're going to be different depending on the year of maturity that you're on. So if you're on four, it could be 2.5, and we'll get more into like how to actually calculate that later on. So there's also something known as a yield curve, which describes the same concept as I talked about before, maturity year to versus yield rate, um, which in this case yield rate you can think of this as, or spot rate. So maturity year to spot rate. And so as the year to maturity increases, then the yield rate will also going to increase, this given that you have a fixed par value. And so if we really think about this, like why is this the case? Well, if we go from 1 year to 2 years, right? If we have a fixed par value, that's going to mean that every single year we're going to be increasing at a higher rate than if we had a lower years to maturity, let's say 2 years. And so the overall yield after getting the present value from all discounted future cash flows is a mix of all of the spot rates from time zero to time n. So if we look at this time diagram over here, if 1 to 4, if 1 to 5 or 50, and then 1,000 is the par value or like the redemption amount, we can discount each of these by their own individual spot rates. And as we talked about before, spot rates, they start at zero. So for example, let's just go over what this means. So if the spot rate at 3 is S3, then at every single, we're going to discount this 50 value that it's being paid at time 3. Every single year back we discount it, we're going to be discounting it by the factor of S3. For year 2, every single year that we discount this payment at year 2, we're going to discount it by the spot rate at year 2. Same for year 5. So this, you can think of this spot rate as an interest rate for every individual time period. And you can think of this as whenever we have, let's say, a zero, and this is all with zero coupon bonds. Like the entire concept of it is with zero coupon bonds. You can apply these, like you can use spot rates into problems where you have coupon payments and redemption amount, but fundamentally, like the idea is like the annual, you can think of it as the annual effective interest rate from time zero to time n for zero coupon bonds. So if I'm at time zero and I'm at like X, and my year to maturity is 5 years, And then at that point, at time 5, I get a redemption amount of 1,000. What does that mean? Then that means my spot rate is essentially x times our spot rate, 1 plus the spot rate to the fifth equals 1,000. That's if that's redemption amount, and then we solve for the spot rate. And this is with 0 coupons. So as in that example, there were no 0 coupons. And you really need to understand, I would say, like, the most important thing is if you understand this framework, like this diagram over here, of how if we're finding the present value, then all we need to do is discount each payment at each time period by its own different spot rate. So spot rate 1, spot rate 2, spot rate 3, spot rate 4, spot rate 5. Okay. And then forward rates, you can think of forward rates as, so spot rates were all from time 0 to time n. Right? Spot rates were all going from time 0 to time n. Forward rates are whenever you go from time x to time y. So where x is greater than 0. So if you're going from time 2 to time 3, then that would be considered a forward rate. Or even if you're going from time 1 to 4, a spot rate is considered whenever you go from time 0 to any other time period. And why do we need these forward rates? But the reason behind that is because let's say at time 0, let's say you purchase something at time 0, then that the spot rate would be applied at the end of year 1, at the end of year 2. But now let's say that you made an investment at year 2. At year 2, you made an investment. Okay. Now, what would be the value of that investment at year 3? You can't use spot rates because spot rates are only account for 0 to 1, 0 to 2, 0 to 3. You would need to have some sort of rate that gets you from the value at time period 2 to the value at time period 3. And that's the entire reason why we have forward rates in the first place, is how can we get to the value between two time periods where the first time period does not start at 0. And so this actually is calculated from spot rates. So if we look at this example over here, how do we get the forward rate from 1 to 2? So again, in the previous example that I mentioned, if I invested something at time period 1, how can I find the value of it at time period 2? Note that I did not invest this at time period 0. If I invested this at time period 0, I could just use the spot rates, and I could just square the 2-year spot rate, and that would give me the value at time period 2. But here I'm investing at time period 1. So how can I get this? Using spot rates. Well, we know that if we start at x at time period 0, and if we multiply by the spot rate for 1, that's going to get us the value at time period 1. If we multiply that again by a forward rate, that's going to give us the value at time period 2. Now, if we do the same thing with spot rate 2, we just need to, as I mentioned before, we just need to square the spot rate value. We just need to square the spot rate value and then multiply that by x. Right? So you can see in this equation, right, x times 1 plus s2 squared, that's going to give us the value at time period 2. What's also going to give us the value at time period 2 is if we take that value at time period 1, multiply it by the forward rate, that's going to give us x2. So if we put these equations and we equal them together, right, substituting the fact that x times the spot rate for 1 is going to equal the value at time period 1, if we put all of these equations together, then we can just take 1 plus s2 squared and divide that by 1 plus s1 minus 1, which will give us the forward rate. So essentially, this is the entire idea of this, is we can use spot rates to calculate forward rates, and forward rates are essentially when we want to go from one time period that's not 0 to another time period in the future. So the notation for this or the wording that you'll hear is 1 year forward rate deferred 2 years. So 1 year forward rate is the duration of the forward rate, and deferred 2 years is when the forward rate actually starts. So in this example, the forward rate would start at time period 2, and it will end at time period 1, at time period 3. So there's also like two different notations you can think of this as, or like that are commonly used, and which is this. So ft comma t plus 1 and mft. So the ft t comma 1 refers to the time at which it starts, and the duration and basically the time when it starts and time when it ends. Right, so 2 and 3, and then this would be 2, 1, and 2, or it would be 1F2. Starts at 2, duration is 1. This one starts at 2, ends at 3. Essentially saying the same thing. So that's forward rates in a nutshell. I think really you need to understand interest rates, how those work, and how to go from one time period to how to discount cash flows, how to accumulate cash flows. Like all of this is covered. Like the basics of how this works is covered in time value of money section. If you learn about loans and bonds and have a strong understanding of that, then this should be pretty simple to really understand. These are just new terms and new concepts that really build on top of one another. Let's just go over like a couple of things that I would like to say here. So we talked about spot rates. Spot rates are, you can think of them as interest rates from going from a time period starting at 0 to time period n. And then prices are determined from this as well, and you can go from spot rate to price to spot rate. Those are some common questions that could come up. Let's see. So like a price. So let's just think of an example. So you can have a price at time 0, and then you can say, okay, the spot rate at time at for year to maturity is 4 is 2.5%. What's the value at time period 4? Then you just apply the spot rate just in the same way you would apply interest rates. Yeah, the main thing I would say is you really need to understand that spot rates start at time period 0. Okay, I think that should be pretty much it. Again, this is just an overview of like one concept in topic 5, which is just general cash flows. So time 0 to time 1 to time 2 to time 3 to time 4, the same spot rate would be applied if we were referring to year to maturity equals 4. If it's 3, the same thing would be applied if we're referring to year to maturity equals 3. Okay. And okay, I guess another thing is this is if this is for zero coupon bonds, and this is when the par value is fixed. So for example, if I have a par value, a question could be if I have this par value at and the total number of payments is 3, time period's 3, that's the duration, and par value is 1,000, and the spot rate is S3 is 2.1%. Could be a question, okay, what's the present value? And I feel like that's sort of the fundamental ideas that I just wanted to lay the groundworks for. And you can do more practice through SOA, through coaching actuaries, and the more practice you do, you will eventually get better at this. All right, so I think that's about it. Thank you very much.